Welcome to the Chopin channel. I'm Roberto Poli. Most pianists are familiar with Karl Czerny's The School of Velocity, opus 299. I, for one, was raised on many Czerny etudes, and I certainly remember quite a few from this collection. I particularly remember the effort in applying abstract patterns, scales, arpeggi, and other technical formulas to the framework of each etude. What makes this collection truly challenging, however, is not so much the technical material itself, but something that is often overlooked: the speeds that Czerny specified through his metronome markings. Take the first etude, for example. Played at a moderate tempo, it is perfectly suited to working on evenness of rhythm, pulse, and sound. But once one looks at the tempo indicated, half note equals 108, the nature of the challenge changes entirely. Suddenly, all those concerns about evenness of rhythm, pulse, sound must be addressed within the framework of fitting 16th notes into a single second. As one progresses through the volume, it becomes increasingly clear that speed is a central focus. After all, velocity, speed, is right there in the title. And yet, the 4 volumes that make up the School of Velocity by Czerny never quite explain how to play fast. They simply provide material that must be played fast. But isn't that true of any piece that can or should be played fast? We hardly need Czerny's opus 299 to find fast music, and his other volumes of etudes alone offer countless examples. So, what makes these particular etudes specific to speed? The answer may lie in the title itself, which is based on a mistranslation in English. The German word Geläufigkeit does not literally mean speed. It could be translated as fluency, effortlessness, facility. Of course, speed can fall into the notion of fluency, effortless, and facility. The problem lies precisely in equating speed to any of these terms. That equation is the real misunderstanding, I think. Yes, the etudes are supposed to be played at an elevated speed, as Czerny indicated. But what, then, does the idea of effortlessness or facility imply? Not speed alone, the physical ability to execute them, but the psychological ease that speed is produced with. This concept lies at the heart of early 19th century piano playing. As the piano became the household instrument, more and more people desired to play it competently, and a profusion of etudes emerged, and not only to train pianists. Indirectly, works such as etudes, most of which involving technical challenges, also displayed a composer's own virtuosity, and the vehicle was printed music. Composers could showcase their technical prowess to a broad public through their compositions without ever being heard, so to speak. The creation of piano methods had begun since the late 1700s. Daniel Gottlob Türk's Klavierschule, an influential publication that appeared in 1789, was one of the first methods to provide complementary pieces in support of the technical and interpretive aspects he discussed throughout the volume. By the early 1800s, a flurry of methods that included collections of etudes and exercises began to appear, introducing the perception that technical facility was attainable by studying the appropriate material. Beethoven and other composers of the time did not write etudes, perhaps because they did not see how the form had value as artistic manifestation. The use of pedagogical material was specifically addressed to the amateur pianist, and it's also conceivable that a composer such as Schubert, for example, would have felt disinclined to contribute to the genre, given his relatively limited pianistic abilities. Czerny's contributions, however, were influential in shaping piano playing. The School of Velocity, Opus 299, appeared in 4 volumes between 1833 and 1838, a time frame that is particularly relevant when we consider Chopin, whose 2 sets of etudes, Opus 10 and Opus 25, were published almost simultaneously. In publishing etudes for the piano, Chopin was in some ways following a trend. In the 1820s and 30s, pianist composers such as Ignaz Moscheles, Johann Peter Pixis, Ferdinand Ries, Muzio Clementi, Henri Hertz, Friedrich Kalkbrenner, were all publishing sets of etudes. Returning to Geläufigkeit, which we translated as fluency, effortlessness, facility, what exactly did Czerny mean by it? We find a clue in some of the tempo indications he assigns to these etudes, specifically the term volante, in Italian meaning flying. Translated into German, this becomes fliegende, a term that in piano playing may seem unusual or even foreign to us today. Yet it refers to a very specific technique that was widespread in the early 19th century. The action of pianos from that time was lighter, and the key depth considerably shallower than that of modern instruments. These characteristics made possible a physical approach quite different from the finger-driven articulation that dominates modern technique. The so-called fliegende technique consisted of grouping notes of a passage into clusters as if they were blocked chords, which were then rapidly rolled using a slight wrist rotation rather than finger action. This meant that a scale, for example, was not understood as a sequence of individual sounds the way it is understood today, but as a sequence of gestures, each comprising a number of notes. The positions of these groups, particularly in scales, were generally determined by thumb passages. The first etude of Czerny's Opus 299 offers a clear illustration of this approach, especially since it's in the key of C major, where the fingering is straightforward and black keys are largely absent. Each scale in the opening, all the scales here are based on the C major scale pattern, is subdivided into block groups, the first comprising 5 notes, then 3, then 4, then 3, and so on. After understanding the basic blocking, each group is then rolled quickly. The wrist rotation enforces the depression of each note, from the top to the bottom in the case of a descending scale, and from bottom to top in an ascending scale. This allows avoiding finger articulation entirely. Gradually, groups are combined, eventually extending across the 2 octaves that each scale in the etude features. The same principle applies effectively to arpeggios, as in the Etude number 3, which focuses on arpeggiated figures in both hands. Etude number 4 explores swirling turns. While number 6 works with fixed hand positions and no thumb crossings at all. At this point, I think the pedagogical purpose of these short pieces becomes clear. While they can serve other technical goals, foundational to playing the instrument, the indicated tempi demand more than sheer finger speed. In fact, executing them at the right speed without physical strain is virtually impossible unless one employs the fliegende technique. And so, Geläufigkeit, understood as effortlessness, facility, is fundamentally a matter of mental fluency rather than finger fluency. Achieving the required speeds depends on the brain processing the music as blocks of notes that are rolled as groups, over which a clear grid-like rhythmic structure is then imposed. Speed, in this sense, is not forced. It emerges naturally from clarity of organization and economy of motion. By the 1840s, however, the piano was already in the midst of an important transformation. Larger performance spaces demanded greater power, and this inevitably began to change both the instrument and the way it was played. As performances called for increasing brilliance and projection, piano makers realized that the light action that was typical of earlier instruments was no longer adequate. The older technical ideal, where sound was produced almost entirely by the fingers, was insufficient. This shift, which began in the 1840s and continued over several decades, led to the construction of stronger frames and heavier, more resistant mechanisms. As the system of levers and the descent of the key became proportionally heavier, with less resistance over a greater distance, pianists needed to rethink how sound was produced. Chopin witnessed only the beginning of this evolution, yet his aesthetics of sound and his insights into the use of the upper body were already pointing toward the future. One cannot try to play everything from the wrist, as Kalkbrenner claims, Chopin wrote in a draft for a piano method, responding to the then common belief that playing the piano should exclude physical resources above the wrist joint, meaning excluding forearm, upper arm, and shoulder, and using finger action or articulation to play everything. There is another important point to be made, and it concerns our modern understanding of what evenness actually is. Rhythmic evenness, in particular, occupies a privileged place in contemporary piano pedagogy. I assume that this value was shared by 19th century pianists as well. Yet, what remains unclear is what rhythmic evenness meant to the ears of a 19th century musician. Their expectations were almost certainly different from ours, and the reasons have to do with how perception has been refined through decades of technological advances, particularly in the way we measure and keep time. When we consider the lighter action of pianos from the 1830s and 40s alongside these different expectations, it becomes easier to understand that the digital precision desired and often demanded today was unlikely to have been central to the 19th century pianist's conception of evenness. In fact, I believe that a fascinating entry in Chopin's piano method makes this point explicit. No one will notice the unevenness of sound in a very fast scale as long as the notes are played in equal time. This statement suggests that temporal, not rhythmic regularity, rather than absolute equality of tone production, may have been the primary concern in playing fast passages back then. The listener's perception, or more precisely, the brain's ability to complete, so to speak, the musical image, played a significant role in how evenness was experienced and understood. How then did the indispensable use of the fliegende technique affect Chopin's playing, and how did he apply it in his music? Born in a time where this technique was emerging as a fundamental element of virtuosity in piano playing, Chopin can be regarded as a partial witness to its development. His largely self-taught background may have prevented him from absorbing the fliegende technique as a formally codified pedagogical principle. Nevertheless, patterned passages are pervasive in Chopin's music, and the speeds they require, or at least those we now assume to be correct, often fall within the realm of fliegende technique. A number of examples illustrate this clearly, and I'd like to offer my own performances to illustrate it. Let's begin with the final movement of the sonata in B-flat minor, opus 35. I hope the video captures how I employ fliegende technique in this context. I'll often talk over the playing to explain what happens, but also to circumvent the copyright violation on my own recordings, which are distributed by Naxos of America. Fliegende applies mostly to scales and three-note groups and sequences, particularly here, 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 and here. Here are two moments from the fourth movement of the sonata in B minor, opus 58, both involving scales with all 5 black keys. This scale, one of many, but also the descending bits of the scales in the second key. These patterned groups as well. Now, a few passages from the scherzo in B-flat minor, opus 31, involving scales, arpeggi, and pattern figurations. Interestingly, one of the etudes from Czerny's opus 299 is based on the exact same notes of the first appearance of the key of D-flat major in the scherzo. Here, not just the arpeggiated figure, but also the scales in both hands. In these patterned groups, particularly the descending arpeggiations, which I split between the two hands. this passage, I use fliegende in the quick right-hand figurations between octaves. The Scherzo in E major opus 54 also offers a few examples. Here, particularly in the hand crossings involving arpeggios. But especially in this scale. And in this 4-note descending pattern. Here, both in the 3-note groups and arpeggio in the right hand. To conclude, a passage from the Polonaise in F-sharp minor, opus 44, a moment that I found extremely difficult to play accurately until it occurred to me that the fliegende technique would have helped. In performances of a contemporary work by Franz Liszt, Reminiscence de Don Juan, written a few months before the Polonaise we just heard, I also applied the fliegende technique in various technical formulas, particularly in scales and arpeggi. While modern pianos might not give us the opportunity to use the fliegende technique systematically, we can at least benefit from it conceptually. Ultimately, what Czerny's School of Velocity opus 299 invites us to reconsider is not how fast we can move our fingers, but how clearly and economically we can think. Geläufigkeit, understood in its historical sense, is not the conquest of speed through effort, but the disappearance of effort through organization. The fliegende technique reminds us that velocity was once the byproduct of gesture, grouping, and mental clarity, of allowing the body to cooperate with the imagination rather than to struggle against it. By learning to hear and conceive rapid passages as a sequence of groups shaped by minimal motion, we can often approach high speeds without tension. Speed, then, ceases to be a goal in itself it becomes the audible consequence of fluency. On a modern piano, we may never truly recreate the physical conditions that made this technique fully natural on instruments of Chopin's time. When using it, we implement a degree of finger action, or at least what I call traction, the grip of the fingertip on the key surface, to sculpt the rhythm of the values represented in the score. Still, the conceptual legacy of fliegende remains invaluable. In this sense, Czerny's School of Velocity is less a manual for fast playing than a lesson in ease. 2 centuries later, Czerny still challenges us to rethink what virtuosity really means, and to recognize that true brilliance at the keyboard begins not in the fingers, but in the mind.